there exists within certain souls a doorway that should never have been opened, a threshold between self and other that was meant to remain sealed. Yet you, dear listener, were born with that door ajar, and through it flows a river of sensation that drowns more than it nourishes. Tonight we speak of the hidden cost of feeling too much. Not the romanticized version peddled by spiritual marketplaces, but the raw, unfiltered truth about what it means to be an energetic receptor in a world full of transmitters. You who have walked into crowded spaces and felt your chest tighten with anxieties that were never yours, who have absorbed the unspoken grief of strangers like a psychic sponge. You know something is different about your nervous system, something that makes you both blessed and cursed. But here is what they will not tell you in the self-help circles. What the wellness industry carefully omits from their empowerment seminars? Your gift is not simply sensitivity. It is permeability. And permeability, when unconscious, becomes a form of possession. Not by demons or spirits, but by the unprocessed emotional debris of everyone around you. You become a walking receptacle for the shadows others refuse to carry. The danger begins in childhood, often before memory can capture it. The empathic child learns to navigate the emotional weather of their environment as a survival mechanism. When the father's rage fills the house like smoke, the child's nervous system adapts by becoming hypervigilant to every shift in energy. When the mother's depression hangs heavy in the air, the child unconsciously takes on the role of emotional regulator, brightening their own spirit to lift the darkness they sense but cannot name. This is not nobility. This is adaptation to dysfunction. What emerges from this early training is an adult who experiences the world through a filter of heightened receptivity. But receptivity without boundaries is not enlightenment. It is energetic chaos. The unguarded empath walks through life collecting fragments of everyone else's unhealed wounds, carrying them home like souvenirs from emotional battlefields they never chose to enter. I have worked with countless individuals who described feeling perpetually exhausted, as if their life force were being drained through invisible channels. They speak of entering rooms and immediately sensing tension, of absorbing the moods of coworkers until they can no longer distinguish their own feelings from the collective emotional atmosphere. They report nightmares filled with faces they do not recognize, dreams heavy with sorrow that belongs to no memory they can claim as their own. This is the first dark truth. Empathy, when unconscious, is not connection. It is contamination. The boundaries of the self become so porous that the individual begins to lose track of where they end and others begin. They mistake absorption for compassion, energetic merger for love. But love does not require you to carry another's pain in your body. Love does not demand that you sacrifice your peace to prove you're caring. The second truth emerges from the first. The unconscious empath becomes addicted to their own overwhelm. They begin to believe that feeling everything is evidence of their spiritual advancement, their moral superiority. They wear their sensitivity like armor, protecting them from the more difficult work of developing discernment. It becomes easier to merge with others' emotions than to face the terror of their own inner emptiness. The chaos of absorption masks the silence they fear to encounter within themselves. Watch how the unaware empath moves through relationships. They are drawn repeatedly to those who are emotionally unavailable, energetically depleted, or psychologically fragmented, not because they are masochistic, but because their nervous system has been conditioned to equate love with intensity, connection with crisis. They mistake the familiar overwhelm of trying to heal another for the sacred work of intimacy. They become professional rescuers, addicted to the drama of salvation that never quite arrives. There is a pattern here that few recognize. The empath attracts the very people who will drain them, because unconsciously, they believe their worth is measured by their capacity to absorb pain. They have confused their identity with their dysfunction. To stop absorbing would mean confronting the terrifying possibility that they might not be needed, that their value might not lie in their ability to carry what others refuse to hold. The third truth is perhaps the most disturbing. The unhealed empath often becomes a magnet for what I call energetic parasites. These are not supernatural entities, but rather individuals whose own emotional wounds have created a kind of psychic hunger. They are drawn to empaths like moths to flame, sensing the open channels through which they can discharge their unprocessed material. The empath, mistaking this for being chosen or needed, allows themselves to become a dumping ground for toxicity they did not create and cannot transform. These relationships follow a predictable pattern. The parasitic individual presents themselves as wounded, misunderstood, or temporarily struggling. They appeal to the empath's desire to heal, to fix, to save. The empath, feeling a surge of purpose and importance, opens themselves fully to this person's pain. But rather than healing occurring, the empath finds themselves increasingly drained while the other person remains unchanged. The dynamic becomes cyclical. The more the empath gives, the more the parasite demands. The empath's energy is consumed, their boundaries eroded, their sense of self diminished. What makes this particularly insidious is that it often masquerades as spiritual connection or deep love. The empath believes they have found someone who truly sees them, who needs them in a way that feels meaningful. They do not recognize that what feels like profound connection is actually energetic exploitation. They mistake intensity for intimacy, drama for depth. The fourth truth concerns the physical toll. Empaths who have not learned to manage their permeability often develop mysterious illnesses, chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorders, and nervous system dysfunction. Their bodies become battlegrounds for energies that do not belong to them. They carry the stress hormones triggered by others' anxiety, the inflammatory responses activated by absorbed rage, the depressive chemistry absorbed from those around them. Modern medicine, with its focus on individual pathology, often fails to recognize that many empathic individuals are suffering from what could be called energetic poisoning. Their symptoms are real, their pain legitimate, but the source is not entirely internal. They are like canaries in coal mines, absorbing and reflecting the emotional toxicity of their environments. Yet they are treated as if their bodies are simply malfunctioning, rather than responding appropriately to energetic overload. Sleep becomes disturbed because their nervous systems cannot fully discharge the accumulated emotional debris of the day. They wake exhausted, as if they have been working all night processing feelings that were never theirs to process. Their dreams become crowded with images and emotions that seem to come from elsewhere, leaving them feeling more tired upon waking than when they went to sleep. The fifth truth is that many empaths develop addictive behaviors as unconscious attempts to create the boundaries they were never taught to establish. Alcohol numbs the overwhelming input. Food provides grounding when they feel energetically scattered. Shopping or social media offer temporary distraction from the intensity of constant emotional bombardment. These behaviors are often not character flaws, but rather primitive attempts at self-protection in individuals who never learned healthier forms of energetic hygiene. What emerges from all of this is a picture far different from the gentle, spiritually evolved being that popular culture associates with empathy. The unconscious empath is often anxious, depleted, confused about their own needs and desires, prone to dramatic relationships, and struggling with physical symptoms that seem to have no clear medical cause. They live in a state of chronic overwhelm, mistaking their inability to establish boundaries for evidence of their spiritual sensitivity. But here is where the story takes a turn. Recognition of these patterns is not condemnation. It is the first step toward liberation. The empath who begins to understand the true nature of their condition who sees through the romantic mythology surrounding sensitivity, gains access to a different kind of power. Not the power to absorb and carry, but the power to discern and choose. Not the power to fix others, but the power to maintain their own energetic integrity. The journey from unconscious absorption to conscious empathy is not about becoming less sensitive. It is about becoming more selective. It is about learning to feel without drowning, to care without carrying, to love without losing oneself in the process. This transformation requires confronting some of the most deeply held beliefs about what it means to be good, to be loving, to be spiritual. It demands that the empath face their own addiction to being needed, their fear of being ordinary, their terror of the silence that exists within when they stop filling themselves with others' emotions. It asks them to consider the possibility that their greatest act of service might not be absorbing the world's pain, but demonstrating what it looks like to maintain energetic sovereignty while remaining open-hearted. This transformation begins with a recognition that few are willing to face. The empath must acknowledge that their compulsive absorption of others' emotions serves not only the apparent function of helping, but also a hidden psychological need. Deep within the empathic psyche lies a wound so profound that it has shaped their entire approach to existence. It is the wound of early invisibility, of learning that their own needs were inconvenient, their own pain unwelcome, their own voice too loud for the fragile adults who should have protected them. The child who becomes an empath often does so because authentic selfhood was not safe in their early environment. To survive, they learned to become what others needed them to be. They developed antennae so sensitive they could detect the slightest shift in another's emotional state, adjusting their own energy accordingly to maintain harmony. But this adaptation, brilliant though it was for survival, becomes a prison in adulthood. The sixth truth is that many empaths are unconsciously recreating the dynamics of their childhood in every relationship they enter. They seek out people who need fixing. Because being needed feels like being loved, they confuse intensity with intimacy, crisis with connection. The adrenaline rush of trying to save someone activates the same neural pathways that once kept them vigilant for danger in their family system. It feels familiar, even comfortable, despite being exhausting. This pattern runs so deep that many empaths cannot imagine relationships without drama, without someone to rescue, without some form of emotional crisis to navigate. They have become addicted to their own stress hormones, dependent on the chemical cocktail that floods their system when they encounter someone in distress. Peace feels foreign, almost threatening. In stillness, they must confront the emptiness that their constant absorption has been masking. The seventh truth reveals itself in the realm of projection. The unconscious empath often projects their own disowned shadow onto those they claim to be helping. They see themselves as the light bringer, the healer, the one who understands. But lurking beneath this identity is often a profound anger, a deep resentment at having to carry so much that does not belong to them. This anger, being unacceptable to their self-image, gets projected onto others or turned inward as depression and self-attack. I have witnessed empaths who speak eloquently of compassion while harboring tremendous rage at the very people they claim to want to help. They resent being needed, even as they engineer situations that ensure they will be needed. They complain about being drained while unconsciously seeking out energy vampires who will confirm their victim narrative. This is not conscious manipulation, but rather the playing out of unconscious psychological dynamics that have never been brought into the light of awareness. The empath's relationship with anger is particularly complex. Having learned early that their own anger was dangerous or unwelcome, they often become repositories for others' unexpressed rage. They absorb the fury that others cannot feel or express, carrying it in their bodies until it manifests as inflammation, autoimmune responses, or sudden explosive outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. They become like pressure cookers, building up emotional charge that was never theirs to contain. The eighth truth concerns the spiritual bypassing that often accompanies empathic identity. Many empaths use their sensitivity as a way to avoid the more challenging aspects of psychological development. They focus on feeling for others while remaining unconscious of their own emotional landscape. They can tell you exactly what everyone else in the room is feeling while having no clear sense of their own authentic desires, needs, or boundaries. This spiritual bypassing manifests as an obsession with being positive, loving, and understanding at all costs. The empath develops a kind of emotional perfectionism, believing that any negative feeling they experience is either not theirs or evidence of their spiritual failure. They become addicted to the identity of being the good one, the understanding one, the one who never judges. But this false transcendence comes at the cost of authentic wholeness. True empathy, as opposed to empathic absorption, requires a strong sense of self. It requires knowing where you end and others begin. It requires the ability to feel with someone without losing yourself in their experience. But the unconscious empath has often never developed this crucial differentiation. They experience others' emotions as if they were their own, making genuine empathy impossible. No. The ninth truth is that many empaths are unknowingly participating in what could be called emotional incest with those around them. Just as sexual boundaries create healthy relationships, emotional boundaries are necessary for authentic connection. When these boundaries are absent, relationships become enmeshed, codependent, and ultimately toxic for all involved. The empath believes they are being loving by absorbing others' feelings, but they are actually violating natural energetic boundaries that exist for good reason. This boundary violation often begins in families where emotional roles become confused. The sensitive child becomes the family therapist, the emotional regulator, the one responsible for managing everyone else's feelings. They learn to read micro-expressions like a survival skill, to anticipate needs before they are spoken, to sacrifice their own emotional reality for the maintenance of family stability. These patterns then repeat in adult relationships with devastating consistency. The 10th truth emerges from understanding the nervous system's role in empathic experience. What many empaths interpret as psychic sensitivity is often trauma-based hypervigilance that has been spiritualized. Their nervous systems, having been chronically activated by early stress, remain in a state of heightened alertness that makes them exquisitely sensitive to environmental stimuli. This includes not just emotional energy, but also sounds, lights, crowds, and other sensory input that can quickly overwhelm their already taxed systems. This hypervigilance, while adaptive in dangerous situations, becomes maladaptive when it cannot be turned off. The empath's nervous system remains stuck in a state of chronic activation, constantly scanning for threats, constantly absorbing information from the environment. They mistake this survival mechanism for spiritual gift, not recognizing that it is often a symptom of unhealed trauma. Recovery for the unconscious empath requires a complete rewiring of their understanding of love, service, and spiritual development. It demands that they question everything they have been told about the nobility of self-sacrifice, the virtue of putting others first, the spiritual superiority of those who feel deeply. It asks them to consider the radical possibility that their highest service might be learning to take exquisite care of themselves. This path is not about becoming selfish or uncaring. Rather, it is about developing what could be called fierce compassion. This is compassion that includes appropriate boundaries, that can say no without guilt, that can witness suffering without absorbing it. It is compassion that recognizes that enabling others' dysfunction is not loving, that rescuing others from their own growth opportunities is not service. The journey toward conscious empathy requires the development of what I call energetic discernment. This is the ability to sense what belongs to you and what belongs to others to feel into situations without becoming overwhelmed by them. It requires learning to trust your own inner compass rather than constantly orienting toward others' needs and feelings. This discernment develops through practice, through the cultivation of inner stillness, through learning to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing how others are feeling at every moment. It requires the empath to withdraw their energetic tentacles from others' business and to focus instead on their own inner landscape. This can feel terrifying at first, like losing a sense that has guided them their entire lives. But what emerges from this withdrawal is something far more precious than the ability to absorb others' emotions. What emerges is the capacity for genuine presence, for authentic connection, for love that empowers rather than enables. The conscious empath learns to offer their presence as a gift rather than their absorption as a service. They discover that they can be deeply caring without taking on others' pain as their own. The 11th truth reveals itself in the realm of energetic inheritance. Many empaths carry not only their own sensitivity, but the unprocessed emotional material of their ancestral line. They become the designated feelers for generations of ancestors who were forbidden to express their pain, their rage, their grief. The empath inherits a psychic debt that was never theirs to pay, carrying forward the emotional residue of traumas that predate their birth. This ancestral burden manifests in peculiar ways. The empath may find themselves overwhelmed by emotions that seem to have no connection to their personal experience. They weep for losses they have never suffered, feel anger about injustices they have never witnessed, carry shame for actions they have never taken. These feelings arise seemingly from nowhere, flooding their system with intensity that belongs to another time, another soul. The 12th truth concerns the phenomenon of empathic mirroring. The unconscious empath becomes a living reflection of everyone around them, shifting their energy to match whatever is needed in the moment. They become chameleons of consciousness, adapting their very essence to create harmony in their environment. But this constant shifting comes at a devastating cost. They lose track of their own authentic nature, their own preferences, their own truth. I have worked with empaths who could tell me precisely what every person in their life needed to feel better, yet had no idea what they themselves enjoyed, desired, or valued. They had become so skilled at reading and reflecting others that they had forgotten how to access their own inner guidance. Their sense of self had become a composite of everyone else's projections and expectations. This mirroring creates a particular form of existential crisis. The empath begins to question whether they have any authentic self at all, or if they are merely a collection of responses to others' needs. They may feel like actors who have been playing roles for so long, they have forgotten who they were before the performance began. The terror of this recognition often drives them deeper into their empathic patterns, seeking identity through service to others, rather than facing the void within. The 13th truth emerges from observing how empaths navigate conflict. Having learned early that emotional discord was dangerous, many empaths develop an unconscious compulsion to maintain peace at any cost. They become emotional firefighters, rushing to extinguish any spark of disagreement before it can grow into something larger. But this peacekeeping often prevents the natural resolution that comes from allowing conflicts to play out organically. The empath's fear of confrontation stems not from cowardice, but from a nervous system that perceives any form of emotional intensity as a threat to survival. Their bodies remember the chaos of early environments where anger meant danger, where raised voices signaled imminent abandonment or attack. As adults, they unconsciously sacrifice their own needs and boundaries to maintain the illusion of harmony, not recognizing that true peace can only emerge from authentic expression. This pattern creates relationships that are superficially calm, but energetically turbulent. The empath absorbs all the unexpressed tensions, carrying them in their body while maintaining a facade of serenity. They become pressure valves for the collective emotional system, preventing explosions by constantly releasing steam through their own overwhelm and exhaustion. The 14th truth concerns the empath's relationship with power. Having learned to survive through submission and accommodation, many empaths develop an unconscious fear of their own authority. They mistake personal power for aggression, boundaries for selfishness, self-advocacy for cruelty. They have been conditioned to believe that good people do not assert themselves, that spiritual individuals always put others first, that power corrupts and therefore must be avoided. But this disowning of personal power does not eliminate it. Power that is not consciously claimed becomes unconscious manipulation. The empath who cannot directly assert their needs may resort to subtle forms of control. They may use their sensitivity as a weapon, making others feel guilty for their emotional responses. They may withdraw their energy as punishment, creating anxiety in those who depend on their emotional availability. The unconscious empath often wields their absorption as a form of passive aggression. By taking on others' emotions and then suffering visibly from the overwhelm, they communicate their displeasure without ever having to directly express it. They become martyrs whose very presence carries an implicit accusation. Their sacrifice becomes a burden that others must carry, a debt that can never be fully repaid. The 15th truth reveals itself in the realm of intimacy. Many empaths confuse emotional fusion with love, believing that the ability to feel what their partner feels is evidence of deep connection. But true intimacy requires separateness as much as it requires closeness. It demands the ability to remain yourself while being in relationship with another. The empath who loses themselves in their partner's emotional landscape cannot offer authentic intimacy because there is no authentic self present to share. This confusion manifests in relationships where the empath becomes obsessed with their partner's every mood, constantly adjusting their own energy to create harmony. They may know their partner's emotional patterns better than their partner does, yet remain strangers to their own inner world. They offer a kind of love that suffocates through its intensity, that overwhelms through its constant attention to the other's emotional state. The partner of an unconscious empath often reports feeling watched, monitored, and managed. The empath's hypervigilance to their emotional state can feel invasive, like being under constant surveillance. The partner may begin to edit their own emotional expression to avoid triggering the empath's absorption patterns, leading to a relationship where authentic feeling becomes impossible for both parties. The 16th truth concerns the empath's relationship with success and achievement. Many empaths unconsciously sabotage their own advancement because success would require them to claim their power, to stand out, to potentially trigger others' envy or resentment. They have learned to make themselves small to maintain safety, to dim their light so others feel comfortable. The thought of shining brightly feels dangerous, selfish, wrong. This self-sabotage often manifests as chronic underachievement, despite obvious talent and capability. The empath may start projects with enthusiasm only to abandon them when success becomes possible. They may deflect compliments, minimize their accomplishments, or find ways to share credit that diminishes their own contribution. They fear that claiming their full power would make others feel diminished, not recognizing that true empowerment lifts everyone. The unconscious empath often attracts situations that confirm their belief that they must choose between success and love, between achievement and acceptance. They surround themselves with people who are threatened by growth, who punish expansion, who reward smallness. These relationships become comfortable prisons that protect them from the terror of their own potential, while confirming their narrative of victimization. The 17th truth emerges from understanding the empath's relationship with money and material resources. Having learned to equate goodness with self-sacrifice, many empaths develop unconscious blocks around receiving abundance. They believe that spiritual people should not desire material comfort, that asking for fair compensation is somehow selfish or unenlightened. This poverty consciousness keeps them dependent on others, reinforcing their patterns of absorption and codependency. The empath may give their services away for free, believing that charging money would corrupt their gift. They may unconsciously attract clients or employers who take advantage of their generosity, who expect them to work for less than their value. They become addicted to being needed more than they value being compensated, creating cycles of financial instability that reinforce their victim identity. This relationship with money often stems from early messages about worthiness, about the virtue of suffering, about the spiritual superiority of those who have less. The empath learns to find identity in struggle, meaning in martyrdom, purpose in poverty. They mistake their financial limitations for evidence of their spiritual advancement, not recognizing that true service requires sustainable resources. The 18th truth concerns the phenomenon of empathic addiction. Just as substances can create chemical dependency, the constant flood of others' emotions can create a form of neurochemical addiction in the empath's brain. They become dependent on the intensity, the drama, the adrenaline rush of emotional crisis. Without this stimulation, they feel empty, purposeless, invisible. This addiction manifests as an unconscious seeking of chaotic situations and turbulent relationships. The empath may find themselves inexplicably drawn to environments where emotional intensity is high, where crisis is constant, where their absorption skills are in constant demand. They mistake this attraction for compassion, not recognizing it as the pull of addiction seeking its next fix. The withdrawal from empathic absorption can feel like genuine depression. The empath who begins to establish boundaries may experience a profound sense of emptiness as they stop filling themselves with others' emotional content. This emptiness is not pathology, but rather the space that must be cleared for their authentic self to emerge. Yet many empaths cannot tolerate this void and quickly return to their absorption patterns to avoid the discomfort of not knowing who they are beneath their reactions to others. The 19th truth reveals itself in the realm of spiritual practice. Many empaths are drawn to spiritual traditions that emphasize service, sacrifice, and selflessness, mistaking these teachings for validation of their absorption patterns. They may become addicted to the identity of being spiritual, using their sensitivity as evidence of their enlightenment, while remaining unconscious of their psychological dynamics. This spiritual bypassing prevents the very growth that authentic spiritual practice is designed to facilitate. The empath uses meditation to escape their inner emptiness, rather than to explore it. They use prayer to ask for strength to carry more rather than wisdom, to discern what is theirs to carry. They seek spiritual experiences that confirm their special status rather than practices that reveal their common humanity. The unconscious empath often becomes attracted to teachers and traditions that reinforce their victim identity, that speak of the special burdens of sensitive souls, that promise techniques for managing their overwhelm rather than questioning the patterns that create it. They seek spiritual solutions to psychological problems, looking for transcendence rather than integration. The 20th truth emerges from observing how empaths relate to their own bodies. Having learned to prioritize others' comfort over their own, many empaths develop a disconnected relationship with their physical form. They may ignore hunger, fatigue, pain, and other bodily signals in service of attending to others' needs. Their bodies become vehicles for service, rather than homes to be cherished and protected. This disconnection manifests as chronic health issues that seem mysterious and untreatable. The empath's body holds the stress of absorbed emotions, the tension of unexpressed boundaries, the inflammation of unprocessed rage. They may develop autoimmune conditions that reflect their system's confusion about what belongs to them and what is foreign. Their bodies become battlegrounds for energies that were never meant to be housed within their cells. The empath who begins to heal must learn to listen to their body's wisdom, to honor its signals, to treat it as sacred rather than sacrificial. This requires a fundamental shift in relationship with the physical form. from viewing it as a tool for others' benefit to recognizing it as a temple that deserves reverence and protection. As we delve deeper into these hidden truths, a pattern emerges that few dare to acknowledge. The unconscious empath is not the evolved spiritual being they believe themselves to be, but rather an individual caught in patterns of trauma that have been sanctified by spiritual bypassing. Their absorption is not service, but sickness. Their sensitivity is not enlightenment, but emergency response. Their sacrifice is not love, but the compulsive reenactment of childhood survival strategies. Yet in recognizing these patterns lies the seed of transformation. The empath who can face these uncomfortable truths without flinching, who can see through the mythology of their specialness to the humanity of their wounding, gains access to a different kind of power entirely. This power is not the ability to absorb what others cannot hold, but the capacity to remain present without being consumed. It is not the power to fix the broken, but the wisdom to recognize that some fractures are sacred, that some pain serves purposes we cannot comprehend. The empath who awakens from their unconscious patterns discovers that their greatest gift was never their permeability, but their potential for conscious presence. The 21st truth concerns the phenomenon of energetic contagion. The unconscious empath does not simply absorb individual emotions, but becomes infected by collective psychological states. They walk through shopping centers and absorb the consumer anxiety of hundreds. They attend family gatherings and become repositories for generational trauma that has never been spoken. They watch the news and carry the weight of global suffering as if it were their personal burden to bear. This contagion operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. The empath may not even realize they are absorbing these collective states until they find themselves inexplicably depressed after visiting certain places, irrationally angry after spending time with specific groups, or overwhelmed by grief that seems to have no personal source. They become walking receivers for the emotional broadcasts of humanity, tuning into frequencies of suffering that were never meant to be carried by a single nervous system. The danger here extends beyond personal overwhelm. The empath who unconsciously carries collective pain often becomes a transmitter of that same energy to others. They spread the anxiety they have absorbed, passing along the depression they have collected, contaminating their own relationships with the unprocessed material of strangers. They become unwitting carriers of psychological viruses, infecting their loved ones with emotions that originated elsewhere. The 22nd truth reveals itself in the realm of ancestral patterning. Many empaths are not simply sensitive individuals, but rather the designated carriers for their family lineage's unexpressed emotions. They inherit the ungrieved losses of grandparents, the unprocessed rage of parents, the collective shame of generations who were taught that feeling was weakness. This ancestral burden shapes their entire approach to life, creating patterns of absorption that seem inexplicable until viewed through the lens of inherited trauma. I have worked with empaths who wept uncontrollably when visiting certain geographical locations, only to discover later that their ancestors had experienced significant trauma in those very places. Others found themselves carrying guilt for actions they had never committed, only to learn that previous generations in their lineage had perpetrated acts that created lasting shame in the family system. The empath becomes the repository for all the unfelt feelings of their ancestral line, carrying forward emotional debts that were never theirs to pay. This ancestral absorption often manifests as inexplicable phobias, chronic illnesses that have no medical basis, or compulsive behaviors that seem to arise from nowhere. The empath may find themselves afraid of water without ever having had a drowning experience, only to discover that a great-grandmother had died in a flood. They may develop respiratory issues that clear up when they address the suffocation their grandfather felt, but never expressed during wartime imprisonment. The 23rd truth concerns the empath's relationship with death and dying. Having spent their lives absorbing the unexpressed grief of others, many empaths develop an unconscious fascination with mortality that borders on the pathological. They may find themselves drawn to hospitals, funeral homes, or other places where death energy is concentrated. They seek out the dying, believing they are called to comfort them, not recognizing that they are often feeding on the intensity of the transition. This attraction to death energy serves multiple unconscious functions. It provides the ultimate intensity fix for the empath addicted to emotional overwhelm. It offers a sense of purpose and meaning that validates their identity as someone who can handle what others cannot. And it allows them to avoid confronting their own mortality by constantly witnessing others' transitions. They become professional mourners, carrying grief that belongs to the dead and there. The empath's relationship with death often reflects families rather than processing their own fear of endings, their relationship with life. Having never learned to fully inhabit their own existence, they become fascinated by its absence. They may develop chronic illness as an unconscious way of staying close to the threshold between life and death. They mistake their morbid preoccupations for spiritual depth, their comfort with dying for wisdom, their absorption of others' death energy for service. The 24th truth emerges from understanding the empath's role in family systems. Often, the empathic child is unconsciously chosen by the family to carry what no one else can hold. They become the designated feeler, the emotional processor, the one who absorbs the family's collective shadow so that everyone else can maintain their denial. This role becomes so central to their identity that they cannot imagine existing without it. The family often reinforces this role through both reward and punishment. The empathic child receives attention and validation when they successfully absorb and process family emotions. They are praised for their sensitivity, their understanding, their ability to make others feel better. But they are also punished when they attempt to express their own needs or establish boundaries. They learn that their value lies in their utility, their worth in their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others' comfort. This family role follows the empath into adulthood, where they unconsciously recreate the same dynamics in their chosen relationships. They seek out partners who need fixing, friends who require constant emotional support, work environments that demand their empathic services. They mistake this familiarity for love, this utility for purpose, this sacrifice for meaning. The 25th truth reveals itself in the phenomenon of empathic projection. The unconscious empath often projects their own disowned emotions onto others and then absorbs them back, creating a closed loop of psychological confusion. They may project their own anger onto their partner and then absorb it back as if it belonged to the partner originally. This creates a form of emotional double vision, where the empath can no longer distinguish between their own feelings and those of others. This projection occurs because the empath has learned that certain emotions are unacceptable in themselves, but tolerable when experienced as belonging to someone else. They can feel their own rage if they believe it is actually their mother's anger. They can experience their own grief if they convince themselves it belongs to a friend who is struggling. This allows them to have emotional experiences while maintaining their self-image as someone who does not have such difficult feelings. The danger of this pattern is that it prevents the empath from ever fully owning their emotional life. They remain forever at the mercy of what they perceive others to be feeling, never recognizing that much of what they absorb is actually their own disowned material being reflected back to them. They become trapped in a hall of mirrors where every emotion seems to belong to someone else, making authentic self-knowledge impossible. The 26th truth concerns the empath's relationship with pleasure and joy. Having learned to find meaning in suffering and purpose in pain, many empaths develop an unconscious resistance to experiences that feel too good. They may sabotage moments of happiness, create crisis to interrupt periods of peace, or feel guilty when life flows smoothly. They have become addicted to intensity and struggle, mistaking drama for depth and chaos for spiritual significance. This resistance to joy often manifests as an inability to receive good things without immediately looking for the catch, the hidden cost, the inevitable price that must be paid. The empath may push away loving partners who treat them well, preferring the familiar territory of relationships that require constant work and sacrifice. They may abandon projects that bring them pleasure in favor of those that feel more like obligations or burdens. The unconscious empath has often learned to equate happiness with selfishness, pleasure with irresponsibility, joy with spiritual immaturity. They believe that evolved souls are supposed to suffer, that enlightened beings focus on others' pain rather than their own fulfillment. This belief system keeps them trapped in cycles of martyrdom that feel noble, but are actually forms of sophisticated self-harm. The 27th truth emerges from observing how empaths handle compliments and recognition. Having learned that their value lies in their service to others, rather than their inherent worth, many empaths develop an unconscious aversion to being seen or celebrated. They deflect praise, minimize their accomplishments, and find ways to redirect attention back to others. They have become so identified with being the helper that being helped feels foreign and uncomfortable. This aversion to recognition stems partly from a fear of triggering others' envy or resentment. The empath has learned that standing out is dangerous, that claiming their power threatens others, that success creates isolation. They prefer the safety of invisibility to the vulnerability of being truly seen. They mistake humility for self-diminishment, service for self-erasure, spirituality for self-negation. The empath who cannot receive recognition also cannot receive love, support, or assistance when they need it. They have trained others to see them as the giver, the helper, the one who has it all together. When they finally reach their breaking point, they may find that no one knows how to help them because they have spent their entire lives hiding their own needs and vulnerabilities. The 28th truth reveals itself in the realm of creativity and self-expression. Many empaths suppress their own creative impulses because they fear that authentic self-expression might disturb others or create conflict. They have learned to edit themselves so thoroughly that they no longer know what their own voice sounds like. They may be talented artists, writers, or musicians who never share their work because they cannot bear the thought of potentially upsetting someone with their truth. This creative suppression often stems from early experiences where their authentic expression was met with rejection, criticism, or punishment. The empathic child learns to perform rather than create, to reflect what others want to see rather than express what lives within them. They become mirrors rather than sources, reactors rather than initiators, followers rather than leaders. The cost of this creative suppression extends far beyond artistic expression. The empath who cannot access their own creative voice also cannot access their own life force, their own passion, their own reason for being. They become hollow vessels for others' energies, rather than full expressions of their own unique essence. They mistake their emptiness for selflessness, their silence for wisdom, their invisibility for service. The 29th truth concerns the empath's relationship with anger and aggression. Having learned that these emotions are dangerous or unacceptable, many empaths develop impulses. They may become passive, elaborate psychological strategies for avoiding their own aggressive, expressing anger through withdrawal, silence, or subtle sabotage. Or they may absorb others' anger and express it on their behalf, becoming the family or group scapegoat who carries everyone's disowned rage. This relationship with anger creates particular problems in relationships where healthy conflict is necessary for growth and intimacy. The empath may avoid necessary confrontations, allowing resentment to build until it explodes in ways that damage the relationship. Or they may absorb their partner's anger and carry it in their body, developing physical symptoms that reflect the inflammatory nature of unexpressed rage. The unconscious empath often attracts partners who are comfortable with anger and aggression, hoping to experience these emotions vicariously through the relationship. But this dynamic creates an imbalance where one person carries all the softness and the other carries all the fire. Neither person gets to experience their full emotional range, and both remain incomplete. The 30th truth emerges from understanding the empath's relationship with time and energy. Having never learned to value their own resources, many empaths give away their time and energy as if these were unlimited commodities. They say yes when they mean no, commit to more than they can handle, and exhaust themselves trying to meet everyone else's expectations. They have confused generosity with self-abandonment, service with slavery, love with depletion. This mismanagement of personal resources stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of their own worth and limitations. The empath believes that their value lies in their availability, their worth in their willingness to sacrifice. They fear that setting boundaries will result in abandonment, that saying no will prove they are selfish, that prioritizing their own needs will make them bad people. The result is a life of chronic overwhelm, constant exhaustion, and resentment that cannot be expressed because it conflicts with their self-image as a giving person. The empath becomes a victim of their own generosity, trapped in patterns of overgiving that serve no one well. They become so depleted that they have nothing authentic to offer, giving from emptiness rather than overflow. As these truths accumulate, a picture emerges that challenges everything our culture teaches about empathy, sensitivity, and service. The unconscious empath is not the spiritually evolved being they appear to be, but rather an individual caught in sophisticated patterns of self-abandonment that masquerade as love. Their absorption is not service but compulsion. Their sensitivity is not gift but wound. Their sacrifice is not noble but neurotic. Yet within this stark assessment lies the possibility of profound transformation. The empath who can face these uncomfortable truths without defensiveness, who can see through the mythology of their specialness to the humanity of their conditioning, gains access to something far more valuable than the ability to absorb others' emotions. They gain the possibility of authentic empathy, conscious compassion, and genuine service that arises from wholeness rather than woundedness. This transformation requires a fundamental rewiring of their understanding of love, service, and spiritual development. It demands that they question everything they have been taught about the virtue of self-sacrifice, the nobility of putting others first, the spiritual superiority of those who feel deeply. It asks them to consider the radical possibility that their highest service might be learning to honor their own boundaries, trust their own guidance, and maintain their own energetic integrity. The path forward is not about becoming less caring or more selfish. It is about developing what could be called fierce compassion, love that includes appropriate boundaries, service that does not require self-erasure, empathy that does not demand absorption. This transformation begins with the recognition that true empathy is not the ability to feel what others feel, but the capacity to remain present with suffering without being overwhelmed by it. The conscious empath learns to distinguish between empathy and absorption, between compassion and codependency, between service and sacrifice. They develop the ability to witness pain without taking it on, to offer support without losing themselves, to love without merging. This is not a lesser form of caring, but a more refined and sustainable one. This refinement requires the development of what I call energetic discernment, the ability to sense what belongs to you and what belongs to others. This discernment develops through practice, through cultivating inner stillness, through learning to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing how others are feeling at every moment. It requires withdrawing the energetic tentacles that have been constantly monitoring others' emotional states and focusing instead on one's own inner landscape. The journey from unconscious absorption to conscious empathy is perhaps one of the most challenging psychological transformations an individual can undertake. It requires facing the terror of one's own emptiness, the fear of being ordinary, the dread of being unloved if one is not useful. It demands a complete restructuring of one's identity, relationships, and understanding of what it means to be of service in the world. But perhaps the most terrifying truth of all is that the unconscious empath has become addicted to their own martyrdom. They have learned to find identity in their wounds, meaning in their suffering, purpose in their pain. The thought of healing completely, of no longer carrying others' burdens, of standing in their own power without apology, feels like a kind of death. Who would they be if they were not the wounded healer, the eternal rescuer, the one who understands what no one else can comprehend? This addiction to martyrdom runs so deep that many empaths will unconsciously sabotage their own healing to maintain their familiar identity. They will attract new crises, just as old ones resolve. They will find new people to save, just as previous projects of rescue reach completion. They will discover new wounds to tend, just as ancient injuries begin to close. The chaos has become their comfort zone, the overwhelm their home. The 31st truth reveals itself in the realm of decision-making. The unconscious empath has often lost the ability to make choices based on their own authentic desires and needs. Instead, they make decisions based on what they believe will cause the least disruption to others. What will maintain harmony? What will avoid triggering anyone's disappointment or anger? They have become decision makers for everyone except themselves. This pattern creates a life that feels hollow and inauthentic, as if they are living someone else's existence rather than their own. They may find themselves in careers that drain them because they thought it would please their parents. They may remain in relationships that suffocate them because they fear the other person cannot survive without them. They may live in locations that depress them because moving would upset the family system they have spent their lives maintaining. The empath's own desires become so buried under layers of others' expectations that they may not even know what they want anymore. When asked about their preferences, they respond with what they think the questioner wants to hear. When offered choices, they defer to others' wishes. When given opportunities, they consider everyone's feelings except their own. They have become professional people pleasers who have forgotten that they too are people deserving of pleasure. The 32nd truth concerns the phenomenon of empathic overwhelm in intimate relationships. The unconscious empath often experiences their partner's emotions with such intensity that they lose track of their own emotional reality. They may wake up anxious because their partner had a stressful dream. They may feel depressed for days because their partner is going through a difficult period at work. They become emotional weather vanes, constantly shifting based on their partner's internal climate. This emotional fusion creates relationships that feel intense but lack genuine intimacy. True intimacy requires two whole people choosing to share their authentic selves with each other. But when one person disappears into the other's emotional landscape, there is no authentic self left to share. The relationship becomes a kind of psychological cannibalism, where one person's emotional reality devours the other's. Partners of unconscious empaths often report feeling suffocated by the constant emotional monitoring, as if they cannot have a feeling without it becoming a shared experience. They may begin to hide their emotions to protect the empath from absorption, which creates distance and dishonesty in the relationship. The empath's gift becomes a burden that both partners must carry. The 33rd truth emerges from observing how empaths handle success and recognition. Many empaths unconsciously fear that achieving their full potential will make others feel diminished or threatened. They have learned to make themselves small to maintain safety, to dim their light so others feel comfortable shining. The thought of standing fully in their power feels selfish, dangerous, wrong. This fear of success often manifests as chronic underachievement, despite obvious talent and capability. The empath may start projects with enthusiasm, only to abandon them when recognition becomes possible. They may deflect opportunities for advancement, claiming they are not ready or qualified. They may surround themselves with people who are threatened by growth and expansion, who punish success and reward mediocrity. The unconscious empath often believes that their role is to lift others up while remaining in the shadows themselves. They become professional enablers, helping others shine while ensuring they remain invisible. They mistake this self-diminishment for humility, this self-sacrifice for love, this self-betrayal for service. The 34th truth reveals itself in the realm of physical health and embodiment. The unconscious empath often treats their body as a vehicle for serving others, rather than a sacred temple deserving of care and reverence. They ignore physical symptoms, push through exhaustion, and override their body's signals in service of others' needs. They have learned to prioritize everyone else's comfort while neglecting their own physical well-being. This disconnection from the body creates a cascade of health issues that often seem mysterious and untreatable. The empath's nervous system, chronically overstimulated by absorbed emotions, may manifest symptoms that doctors cannot explain. Their immune system, confused by the constant influx of foreign energetic material, may attack healthy tissue. Their endocrine system, disrupted by the stress of constant absorption, may create hormonal imbalances that affect every aspect of their functioning. The body becomes a battlefield where absorbed emotions wage war against authentic selfhood. Unexpressed anger manifests as inflammation. Absorbed grief settles in the lungs and heart. Carried anxiety creates digestive disturbances. The empath's physical form becomes a repository for everyone else's unprocessed emotional material, leading to illness that reflects not their own imbalances, but the collective dysfunction they have absorbed. The 35th truth concerns the empath's relationship with money and material abundance. Having learned to equate goodness with sacrifice and spirituality with poverty, many empaths develop unconscious blocks around receiving financial abundance. They believe that charging for their services would corrupt their gift, that asking for fair compensation is somehow unspiritual, that material comfort conflicts with their role as a servant of humanity. This poverty consciousness keeps the empath dependent on others, reinforcing their patterns of absorption and codependency. They may work for less than they are worth, give away their services for free, or attract clients and employers who take advantage of their generosity. They become addicted to being needed more than they value being compensated, creating cycles of financial instability that confirm their victim narrative. The empath's relationship with money often reflects deeper issues around self-worth and deserving. They may unconsciously believe that they do not deserve abundance, that their pain gives their life meaning, that struggle is evidence of their spiritual advancement. They mistake financial limitation for virtue, material lack for enlightenment, economic dependence for humility. The 36th truth emerges from understanding the empath's role in collective healing. Many empaths believe they are called to absorb and transmute the world's pain, to serve as psychic filters for humanity's suffering. They see their sensitivity as a cosmic responsibility, their absorption as a form of service to the collective. But this grandiose mission often masks a profound narcissism, a belief that they are somehow special or chosen to bear what others cannot carry. This messiah complex creates a dangerous inflation of the ego disguised as spiritual service. The empath begins to believe that their suffering matters more than others, that their sensitivity makes them superior to those who feel less deeply, that their absorption is evidence of their spiritual evolution. They develop a subtle superiority complex wrapped in the language of humility and service. The unconscious empath may seek out situations of collective trauma, drawn to natural disasters, social injustices, or global crises where their absorption skills feel most needed. They become professional sufferers, feeding on the intensity of collective pain while believing they are serving a higher purpose. They mistake their addiction to overwhelm for a spiritual calling, their compulsive absorption for divine service. The 37th truth reveals itself in the phenomenon of empathic inheritance across generations. The patterns of unconscious absorption often pass from parent to child, creating lineages of empathic dysfunction that span multiple generations. The empathic parent, overwhelmed by their own absorption patterns, may unconsciously train their sensitive child to take on the family's emotional burdens, perpetuating cycles of dysfunction that feel like legacy. These inherited patterns run so deep that they feel like genetic programming rather than learned behavior. The empathic child grows up believing that feeling everything is normal, that carrying others' emotions is natural, that sacrifice is the highest expression of love. They inherit not just sensitivity, but the entire complex of beliefs, behaviors, and compulsions that surround unconscious empathy. Breaking these generational patterns requires tremendous courage because it means betraying not just personal conditioning, but family loyalty. The empath who begins to heal may face rejection from family members who depend on their absorption, who need them to remain small and available. The choice to individuate becomes a choice between personal wholeness and family belonging, between authentic selfhood and inherited identity. The 38th truth concerns the empath's relationship with solitude and silence. Having learned to define themselves through their reactions to others, many empaths develop an unconscious fear of being alone. In solitude, they must face the emptiness that their constant absorption has been masking. Without others' emotions to process, they confront the terrifying possibility that they might not exist as separate beings at all. This fear of aloneness drives the empath to seek constant stimulation, constant connection, constant emotional input from their environment. They may become addicted to social media, compulsive about checking on others, unable to sit in silence without immediately reaching for distraction. They mistake their fear of emptiness for social nature, their addiction to stimulation for extroversion, their avoidance of solitude for love of community. Yet it is precisely in solitude that the empath must go to discover who they are beneath their reactions to others. The silence they fear contains the voice they have never learned to hear. The emptiness they avoid holds the space where their authentic self can finally emerge. The aloneness they dread offers the only sanctuary where they can separate their own energy from the absorbed material they carry. The 39th truth emerges from observing how empaths navigate endings and transitions. Having learned to maintain connection at all costs, many empaths struggle to let relationships, situations, or phases of life end naturally. They may cling to relationships that have run their course, remain in jobs that no longer serve them, or resist the natural cycles of growth and change that require letting go of familiar patterns. This resistance to endings stems partly from the empath's fear that they will be forgotten once they are no longer needed. They have learned to equate their value with their utility, their worth with their availability. The thought of being replaced or no longer essential triggers profound abandonment, fears that may drive them to maintain connections long past their expiration date. The empath may also resist endings because they have absorbed so much of others' material that they fear what will happen to those people without their energetic support. They feel responsible for others' emotional stability, guilty about withdrawing their absorption services, terrified that their absence will cause collapse or crisis. They mistake their compulsive caretaking for genuine care, their codependency for love, their inability to leave for loyalty. The 40th truth reveals itself in the realm of creative expression and authentic voice. Many empaths suppress their own creative impulses because they fear that authentic self-expression might disturb others or create conflict. They have learned to mirror what others want to see rather than express what lives within them. Their creativity becomes reactive rather than generative, reflective rather than original, safe rather than truthful. This creative suppression often stems from early experiences where authentic expression was met with rejection, criticism, or punishment. The empathic child learns that their true thoughts and feelings are too much for others to handle, too intense, too raw, too real. They develop an internal editor that filters everything through the question of how others will react, rather than whether it reflects their authentic truth. The cost of this suppression extends far beyond artistic expression. The empath who cannot access their own creative voice also cannot access their own life force, their own passion, their own unique contribution to the world. They become hollow vessels for others' energies, rather than full expressions of their own essence. They mistake their creative silence for humility, their artistic invisibility for selflessness, their unexpressed truth for spiritual maturity. As these dark truths accumulate, they paint a picture that is both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it strips away the romantic mythology surrounding empathy, revealing the unconscious patterns of self-abandonment that masquerade as spiritual gifts. Liberating because it offers the possibility of genuine transformation, of moving from unconscious absorption to conscious compassion, from compulsive caretaking to authentic service. The path forward requires a fundamental rewiring of everything the unconscious empath believes about love, service, and spiritual development. It demands the courage to disappoint others in service of their own authenticity, to set boundaries that might trigger abandonment fears, to choose wholeness over usefulness. It asks them to consider the radical possibility that their highest service might not be absorbing others' pain, but demonstrating what it looks like to live with energetic integrity. This transformation is not about becoming less caring or more selfish. It is about developing what could be called sacred selfishness, the fierce protection of one's own energy and essence in service of something greater than individual comfort. It is about learning to love from overflow rather than emptiness, to serve from strength rather than depletion, to care without carrying. The conscious empath learns to distinguish between empathy and absorption, between compassion and codependency, between service and sacrifice. They develop the ability to feel with others without losing themselves in the process, to witness suffering without taking it on as their own, to offer presence without abandoning their center. They discover that true empathy requires two whole beings choosing to connect, rather than one disappearing into the other's experience. This journey from unconscious absorption to conscious empathy represents one of the most profound psychological transformations available to human beings. It requires facing the terror of one's own emptiness, the fear of being ordinary, the dread of being unloved without being useful. It demands a complete reconstruction of identity, relationships, and purpose. Yet for those brave enough to undertake this journey, what awaits is not the loss of their empathic gifts, but their refinement and purification. They discover that conscious empathy is far more powerful than unconscious absorption, that bounded love is more sustaining than boundless sacrifice, that authentic service flows naturally from integrated wholeness rather than compensated woundedness. The awakened empath becomes not less sensitive but more discerning, not less caring but more conscious, not less connected but more sovereign. They learn to navigate the world of feeling without drowning in it, to serve others without abandoning themselves, to love without losing their way. They become living demonstrations of what it means to feel deeply while remaining whole, to care profoundly while maintaining integrity, to serve authentically without sacrificing selfhood. This is the true gift of the empathic path when walked consciously, the genuine service of those who have learned to transform their wounds into wisdom, their sensitivity into strength, their absorption into authentic presence. They offer the world not their pain, but their peace, not their overwhelm, but their clarity, not their absorption, but their awakened awareness of what it means to love without losing oneself in the process. Now you see the full landscape of the empathic condition laid bare, stripped of its romantic disguises and spiritual platitudes. What emerges is not the gentle, evolved being our culture celebrates, but a soul caught in patterns so ancient and unconscious that they feel like destiny rather than choice. Yet in this darkness lies the seed of your liberation. For you cannot heal what you do not first acknowledge. You cannot transform what remains hidden in the shadows of spiritual bypassing and noble self-deception. The very discomfort you may feel at these revelations is the stirring of something authentic within you, something that has been buried beneath layers of absorbed pain and borrowed purpose. The path before you is not easy, but it is sacred. It demands that you turn away from the familiar comfort of your overwhelm and face the terrifying emptiness of your own unexamined self. It asks you to release your grip on the identity that has sustained you, the role that has given your life meaning, the martyrdom that has felt like love. You must be willing to disappoint those who need you to remain small, to abandon those who feed on your depletion, to walk away from the very dynamics that have defined your existence. But know this, in reclaiming your energy, you do not become less loving. In establishing boundaries, you do not become less spiritual. In choosing yourself, you do not become less human. You become more real, more whole, more capable of the fierce compassion this world truly needs. The conscious empath is not a gentle victim, but a sovereign being who has learned to feel without drowning, to love without losing themselves, to serve without sacrificing their essence. This is your birthright, your potential, your invitation. The question now is not whether you are ready for this transformation, but whether you are brave enough to begin.